Welcome to the second part of the Postflop course. Today we'll talk about value betting and optimal bet sizing and considerations when bluffing. If you have not seen the first part, please do it now. In this video we discussed the first 3 points. Let's start with value betting. A huge leak of many players is that they value bet too small, especially against unknowns, against a fish or a weak regular. Most players think that they have to be balanced against the other regulars, and they don't vary their bet sizing because they think they have to bet a bluff and a value bet with the same amount. But many regulars don't pay attention to this, and you should make sure that you get more value out of your hand. Especially against the fish, it is very important to bet bigger for value, and I see very often too small bets. There are so many fishes which call pot size bets even with these small stack sizes, so they have inelastic calling ranges, and this means there's no difference if you bet half pot or nearly pot size. Another important point are overbets, and many players overbet very rarely or never. There are some spots in which it is necessary to overbet for value, especially when the calling range is very inelastic. Of course, there are always some hands that will fold, but all in all, it is more profitable because you win so much more money with the bigger bet size. When you think about an overbet, ask yourself, is this a good bluff spot? When the answer is no, you will get called very often and you can value bet very big. Another question should be, bust many draws? If this is the case, we should value bet big or even overbet. And when we are wrapping nothing, we should also value bet very big or overbet. At first, it is important to value bet bigger. If you overbet or bet pot size, this is spot dependent. But if you just value bet bigger, you have a big advantage on the most regulars, on the most stakes. Even at the highest stakes, many players have leaks when they value bet. And I talked about this earlier. I think there's a big difference between a mid stakes and a high stakes rack, cause the high stakes racks value bet thinner and better than the average mid stakes racks. Another important point is that many players skip close value bets. I'm not talking about the bet sizing, they just check the turn or the river when they have a clear value bet, cause they misinterpret the board or they underestimate their hand range against villain's range. And we will look into some example hands together. Let's start with the first hand. We have a standard open raise on the button, a big blind defense, and he's an unknown on this table. All hands were played at the $200 to $500 stakes. A potential fish called, and of course we have a clear c-bet, and I see it all the time that many players bet half pot or 60 in this spot. I think this is a big mistake. I think we should bet 3/4 pot minimum, and I think I like 80 or 90 even more, cause the board is super drawy, and as an exploit against the fish we should value bet very big. Unfortunately he folds, but there's no difference for him if we bet 70, 60, 50, 80 or 85. If he has a strong hand or a strong draw, he will call no matter what. When he decides to raise, this is an easy broke spot. Sure, sometimes we're beat, but he can think that he has to protect his king with a hand like king jack, king queen, king 10 or king 7. And he can raise or ship many draws, and that's the reason why we can broke this hand. Next hand, we are on the cutoff and we have kings. The big blind flat calls, and now we can c-bet or not. I think both options are legit. I think in this spot it is a little bit better to c-bet, cause he has a big stack. And this is experience. When they have a bigger stack, they tend to call with more hands. And fun players overvalue their hands too much. But I think the backcheck is also okay. When I had the king in hearts, I prefer the check back. I checked in the spot, but as I told you, now I prefer betting the flop. On the turn we make the nuts and we should bet very big. It is possible that he has an ace and he don't want to bet it himself cause the flush got there. Or he has a strong flush draw or binks the king. Then he will call these hands no matter what, and all weaker hands are just a bluff catcher. And when they like to hero call or to bluff catch, they do it also against a large sizing, especially with his big stack. You should pay attention that you can bet a little bit lighter for value against the fish with a big stack and bluff a little less. So the top end of his range is calling our big bets, and I think he's calling the same range as when we bet 60 or 50, but unfortunately he folds. Maybe he had just air. Next hand, fish opens from the hijack and we have an easy defend with any ace given the good odds. I would call this flop against any normal bet size. When he bets more than 55, I would probably fold my hand. He checks behind, and on the turn I see no reason to bet. We don't get a better hand to fold, and he looks really fishy with his 47-21 stats. He checks back and we river bottom pair. Our hand is relatively strong, even with only bottom pair. He has many ace-high hands, which we beat now, and hands like king queen, king jack, or a hand like king 9. And we should bet. We represent not too much. I think is enough to min bet. When we bet bigger, I can see him fold king high and ace high, and we don't want that. And he called with queen jack. Sometimes you see the sickest calls. When you play against the fish, you have to keep in mind that they want to see villain's cards, and that's a very important factor. Next hand we have ace jack on the cutoff. The button flat calls and we should give up this board texture. He's playing 32-19 and he can have a hand like king deuce or something, but this board just crushes his flatting range and we should just check fold. The turn is a good card, but he can still have a hand like 9-8, 6-7, 6-8, 10-8 or 10-7, or a hand like queen jack or king queen, and he's calling with these hands also. I think we just don't have enough fold equity or equity against his whole range, so we don't have a value bet. 7s and 8s are possible too. So he can have a lot of hands. We can discount a lot of 10x and 2 pairs. He checks again, and now we can discount most mate hands, cause they bet these hands on the turn. You will notice that fun players are really bet happy and they just bet their mate hand when you check to them twice. Sure, very often they just bet the flop, but on this flop are many pair plus draw hands possible, so hands like 6-8, and it is more likely that they check a hand like this on the flop, but they bet a hand like king 6 or king 9, queen 9, queen 6 suited on the turn, The only hand I'm afraid of is ace 3 or a hand like king 3 suited. A hand like pocket 4s or pocket 5s will usually bet the turn to protect the hand and take down the pot. And now we should bet the river, and I bet very big. We can discount ace king and ace queen, cause these hands would 3-bet preflop. So we play very often against ace 7, ace 8, king queen, king jack, king 8, or hands like ace 5 or ace 4, and just a few 3x hands are possible, and very rarely a deuce like ace deuce. And finally he calls with king queen. I think 40 is enough, or something between 40 and 50. A problem is when we check the third time, it is possible that he starts betting his king high and we get into an ugly spot. So we just bet against his weak range and take down a nice pot. That's a standard spot which most regulars never look up on, cause most players think that ace high hand is an easy check down. But there are some spots in which we can value bet ace high or bottom pair. We should never say that ace high hands are pretty standard and you can check down these hands all the time. You should try to extract more value in these spots. Against a regular it is very hard to extract value, but in the ace jack or ace deuce hand we played against the fish. In the next hand the small blind completes. I think raising or checking are both fine. I think checking is a little bit better. Our hand plays very well cause the hand is so connected. When we had a hand like king deuce or queen deuce suited, I would rather raise with this hand, but 9-7 is okay to check, I think. He checks and he looks aggro on this small sample size. I don't know if I bet or checked, but now I would check. I think he will bluff bet very often, cause this board is very dry. So when he checks, I think that he's trapping or he's in check call mode. I check and he checks the turn again. So now I think he is very often a king or an ace high type hand. Maybe a hand like 10 deuce suited. My plan was to bet twice. You should know that villain is not folding to one barrel, especially when we perceive him on king high or ace high or deuce or 4. Then we have to bet twice. Let's talk a little bit about bluffing. We are 5-handed and we cover him, so we can cripple him, or when we bet and he calls, then 210 chips are in the pot and we can pot the river, and then he's crippled and we can discount a large portion of his top range, cause he only completed pre-flop and checked the flop and the turn, so we can perceive him on many ace highs and king highs. I'm normally not a huge fan of bluffing the fun player, but when some factors are given, we can and should bluff. I don't like to bluff a fish 6-handed, cause sometimes they want to gamble a little bit more in the beginning, but in this spot we're 5-handed and he thinks about his opportunities to get in the money. Sure, that's a small thing, but often these small things decide about victory or defeat, and that's why we should consider those things. He calls and we river a 9. When we believe that he has a 4, a deuce, or ace high, king high, then we have a clear value bet. and should not bet too big, because then he will fold his weak hands. 1/5 pot is big enough, and he will call his deuce or his 4 or his ace high. But he played the hand different than I thought. He check called his open-ender on the turn. I thought he will bet this hand often on the flop, but sometimes you will misjudge your opponent. After the first hands, I don't thought that he can play this hand so passive. Maybe he wanted to check raise the flop, but who knows. I just wanted to show you that a hand can go wrong, but when you review hands, you will find so many hands in which everything worked out. You won a nice pot, cause you bet light for value. Next hand, we are the chip leader against the second chip leader. I think we should open raise the small blind very loose, and we have no reason to deviate from this plan. We want to abuse our chip lead and make more chips. I think raising or completing is okay here. He will often give up the flop. When I raise, I invite him to re-steal. I made the experience that they like to check when we complete and take a flop with king deuce suited. When we raise, he could 3-bet or re-steal. I don't know. This hand doesn't play so well in a limp pot, but this deck constellation is a little bit different than in the hand before. I complete this hand because I think we have immediate profit with a flop bet. He will very often give up. We invest 30 in 114 and then a min bet or a half pot size bet on the flop. I don't want to talk too long about pre-flop. If we raise or if we complete, it is important that you play very loose in this spot, especially against a player which looks like a normal regular. But in this flop I want to give up, cause he can have a lot of hands. He checks back and we turn the queen, and we should bet very big. I think it is clear that we have a value bet in this spot. So he has so many pair plus draws or just a draw like a flush draw, and his stack is large enough to call our bet. Don't bet 60 or 70 cause you just have a weak queen. This top pair is very strong in this spot. The river is a disaster and we have to check fold our hand, and he shows us 6 deuce. So again, we have judged him totally wrong. I mean, the turn call is a disaster. Even when he hits the 10, he is beat very often. This is just a maniac call in my opinion. And after his first stats, I wouldn't thought that he can have a hand like 6 deuce, 6 tray or 6-4. I thought he has many jacks in his river range, but there you can see that we often misjudge our opponents, and we see why it is important to bet big. Most opponents don't care how big we bet, except when we shove. We shouldn't exaggerate, but we should often bet on the bigger side. Let's move on to the next hand. We have a clear defend with this hand. The stats should be there soon, and I think he was a very loose player. King 10 should be a passive defend against every position. We call and we flop a king, so we have a standard check call. The turn is okay, but he checks back. We would call the turn again and check fold the river, unless we bank a king on the river. He checks back, and at first glance it looks like we don't beat much, but after the second view you should realize that we have very often the best hand. He will bet most 8x hands on the turn. He's often checking back a queen on the flop. Of course he can check back 10s and jacks also. and he can have an 8 or a queen sometimes. I can't discount these hands 100%, but he can have 10s and jacks, and many ace high hands are possible. He can think that we have a hand like jack 10 or 10-9, that's why we should value bet. But my sizing is too small. Sure, we can't bet super huge, cause he only has a bluff catcher, but thumping between 75 and 100 is a good idea. Even 110 is okay, I think. It is important that you don't check the river, and he's calling with ace high. Maybe this is the advantage of this very small bet size, that he's calling with ace high. Now we look into some hands in which we should overbet. The small blind is a regular, and we have a clear defend. We get very good odds. The flop is a clear check behind for me. We have very little full equity, and the only reason to play a draw aggressive is when we have full equity. And I think the regular will check call a lot on the spot texture. When you have the plan to bet the flop, bet the turn, and shove the river, then it's a different story. But just to bet one street is not profitable when we have nearly no full equity. Then I need a read that he can check fold those boards. When you check your draw behind, not too many opponents think that you are capable of this, and sometimes you get really sick calls. We make the flush, and now we raise for value. I don't think my raise sizing is optimal, and he calls our turn raise. Our line looks really strange, cause we would bet many flush draws on the flop on our opponent's view. But as I told you, I don't think this is a good idea, and you have to think about our perceived range. So what does our opponent think what we could play this way? And I think that he gives us a hand like king 5 with the king in hearts or something like this. The one card flush draw busts, and we should overbet and not bet 150 in the spot. It also looks a bit more bluffy, and we get a very strange call from this regular. Next hand, the button limps, and we check, and the button checks also. Now we have to think, how big do we want to bet the turn? And I think my sizing is very bad. I should bet between 60 and 75. I think I played the turn very bad, but when you play many tables, this sometimes happens. I mark the hands when I think that I made a mistake, or I just go through all the big pots, and then you will see your mistakes. He calls, and he can have a 7, cause he wanted to trap, and he can have some ace high diamond backdoors. Then he has many king 5, king 6, 8 6, 10 6 suited hands, so overcards plus gut shots on the turn, or a hand like ace 5. And we can't value bet against those hands, cause he will fold all his weak hands. So his calling range is very unelastic. When we bet 100, he's going to call a 7, a jack, and a flush. A 4 is betting the flop. It's very rare that he has a 3, so we should bet very huge in this spot. Sure, we're a little bit lucky that he hit his flush, but this example is very good to show you an elastic calling range. Here we have an interesting heads-up hand. I choose to complete the hand, which I normally never do, but I have the read that he raises a lot against incomplete, and then we can complete shove and generate a lot of dead money, and we are in position. so it is no disaster when we see a flop. This flop is okay, and of course we bet. He called and we should check the turn back. We don't have a clear value bet anymore. We river a deuce and we don't wrap too many hands in his eyes. I don't think that he's folding a 4. We block a deuce and he can have a few queens, but the biggest part of his range is king high. So hands like king 3 or king 5, which he checked pre-flop, and then we should bet huge, cause he can level himself that we want to get him to fold with king high. I think he never thinks that we have a deuce or that we bet this big with a deuce, and I decided to overbet again, cause I have the read that he's able to call down very light. Maybe I bluffed him before and he remembered it, I don't know, but when I noticed that someone is very call happy, I try to exploit it the best I can, and he called with a 4. You can think, when his range is so weak, why do we bet so big? When his range is weak and he don't have many value hands, then there's no difference if we bet really small or big, cause his value range is so small in the spot. This may sound contradictory at first, but when you think about it, it makes sense. Cause he's aware that his value range is very small in this spot, and he thinks when I'm always folding, he can exploit me, and he is just trying to push me off my hand with this huge sizing. But we think different, and we are one step ahead of our opponents. We just want to extract value with our hand. When we know that we play against an call happy villain, then a huge bet is appropriate. Okay, let's move on to the next hand. Regular raises from the cutoff, and we have a standard call. We flop very good, and he checks back. That's a typical board. His range is very weak. He has a 8 or a weak 9, and he wants to pot control. And this range is checking back to call a turn bet. He's not checking those hands to fold against a turn bet. His range is weak, but he's calling against any bet size. So it doesn't matter if we bet 50, 60, 70, 80 or 90. When we bet 150, it's a different story, and that's why we should bet on the bigger side in this spot. We can bet some draws with the same sizing. This regular is a bit weaker and he's capable of some weird post-flop calls. When you have a read like this, you should exploit them at the maximum. The river is a very good card. Every flush draw busts, Jack 10 busts, Queen 10 busts, and 6-7 busts. And he calls. I think his call is okay. We can have hands like King Queen Heart, King Jack Heart, and chip this river for value. Let's move on to the next hand. A weak player raises from under the gun, and this is a standard defend. I would check call once on this flop. The turn is an easy give up, and we make the boat on the river. His range is very weak, cause he checked 2 times. When he checks the single suited board behind, he will often give up or just fold to our bet. Or he checks with a hand like pocket 7s with the 7 in clubs, or a hand like ace 5 with 5 in clubs, or jack 10 with the 10 in clubs. So he has some hands with a weak flush in his range, and he will always call these hands against a river bet. We should definitely overbet. Even 180 is okay, and you don't want to bet too huge. You will have many 5 high, 7 high, 9 high, and 10 high flushes, and he calls with the 3 clubs. So either he's bluff catching or he's folding. This sounds a little bit stupid, but against this player type the sizing doesn't matter. Next hand, the button is min raising, and of course we flat call. We flop the second nuts. The turn is a good card cause he's checking many ace highs on the flop, or he has a hand like Queen X plus flush draw. So a hand like Queen Jack with the Jack and heart. Again, we should bet very big, and the river changed not too much. Sure, a few ace queen hands are possible, or ace 10, but I think he will bet ace queen almost always on the flop. But ace 10 and ace 8 are possible, but overall we are ahead and should just chip. When he made trips on the river, he's not going to fold this hand, and he can hero call with a queen. And many draws bust by the river. The stats look very fishy too, and sometimes you get very sick calls. But we have a very sick setup and we lose. But I think you get the point of overbetting. Look at your played hands and look if you got the maximum value on each street. Play fewer tables and concentrate on these spots. Mark the hands and practice this topic. When should we bluff? We should bluff when we can apply ICM pressure, when we are forehanded or on the bubble. It is also important that we cover our opponent, or at least cripple him, when we play bet or check raise all in. So it's not a good spot when we play against the chip leader and they have half a stack left when they lose. And this is especially important against the fish. I talked about it earlier, what this means. We want to bluff good board runouts, so the board changed quite a lot to the river, and villain's range is rather weak. We will look into some example hands and I will go into more detail. We can discount many value hands, and I talked about this in the example before, when we had 9-7 on the Queen Jack Deuce board, or the Queen Deuce trade Jack board, and villain had 9-10 and checked it 2 times, so we can discount a Jack and a Queen. That was a good example, or it's a good spot when we block many value hands of our opponent, especially when we have the nut flush or second nut flush blocker. It's a nice little bonus that we can discount his nut range. Against the fish, many of those factors should be given. There are spots in which 3 of those factors are enough to bluff. It is always a bit different, but I think that's a good schedule you can work with when you can bluff a fun player. Against regulars it is sometimes a bit easier, cause we can define the ranges better. We know what they open raise from middle position, we know what they open raise from early position, and we know what they check back, and this is sometimes not the case when we play against the fish, so we have to work with general rules, and I think this schedule is really good to find profitable bluff spots against the fish. Let's look into some example hands if we can find suitable spots to bluff. In the first hand we get very good odds and should defend this hand passive, and we flop an open-ender. Depending on the sizing we can check call or bluff check raise. The turn is a very bad card to bluff when we think which hands he checks back. There are many ace highs and we have very few full equity. That's why we shouldn't bluff this hand. Many players start bluffing cause it's a scare card, but in his range are so many ace high hands that we should never bluff here. He bets small, but we're not getting the right odds to call, and we have no implieds and shouldn't overplay our draws. The next hand is interesting. A weak player limps and we check back. The flop is not so nice and we just give up. We should check fold the turn. He can still have a lot of hands. He checks back, and as I told you before, the most players bet their value hands on the turn. When we think about which hands he is checking down, he has many queen highs, king highs, and 9 highs. I don't think that he's folding ace high. This spot is similar to the ace deuce spot earlier. I would bet a deuce or a strong ace high hand like ace queen very small, and I would bluff bet 8x and 9x a little bit bigger to fold out his better air, and that's especially the 9 high, queen high and king high hands. The river is a good card cause he never has a flush, cause he would bet his flush draw earlier, and in his eyes we can have a flush. Sure, we would bet the flush draw on the turn, but I don't know how good this player is. I don't think that he can think on that level that we can't have a flush cause we didn't bet the turn, and that's why we should bet 40 cause we can get his better air to fold. When I had a hand like ace deuce or a 4 or pocket threes, I would bet 30, and I think that he is sometimes calling with king high or a hand like queen 9 just to look what we have. But we shouldn't bluff too small, cause then they call just to see your hand, and we don't want that with 9 high. In the next hand we have king 9 suited on the cutoff, and of course we raise. The big blind calls and he's a regular. On this board we have a standard c-bet. The turn is not a good card. We turn the flush draw, but the regular knows that we can barrel a lot of draws, and he can have a lot of ace x and 7x hands, and he's not going to fold those hands. So we have very few full equity on this card. And I had the note on him that he's a little bit call happy, so we shouldn't barrel too much as an exploit. Against a good regular we can second barrel this hand. You should barrel your draws sometimes, cause otherwise you don't get paid when you have a strong hand, when you only show very strong hands. But there are regulars which transform into calling stations on draw heavy boards, and we should exploit this at the maximum. When the turn is a queen in clubs, I would barrel, cause his second pair is now third pair, and I would barrel the 8 in clubs also, or the 10 in clubs. I think you get the point. He can have some busted draws, but we can check a weak ace on the turn to pot control. So we get to the row with some aces or hands like kings and queens. We can bluff catch sometimes and have also some 7x in our range. We bet the flop for equity protection and then check the turn behind, or a hand like 7-8 in clubs or a 7-9 in clubs. We talked about this hand in the first part of the video. This hand is interesting cause we can put a lot of ICM pressure on our opponent. We are the chip leader and I don't like the shove. I like the min raise cause he will call a lot of hands and give ourselves a good price, and then we can take down the pot on the flop very often. I did the mistake of checking back. We have a good hand to check, but we should just bet to take down the pot right now. I was very lucky that he bets the turn that small, and that's the reason why we can call the turn. Many players have a bet size leak. He min bets again, and I decided to shove. We put maximum ICM pressure on him, and I think you see that he often has a hand like ace tray, 5-3 suited, 10-8 suited, 9-8 suited, or better ace high hands like ace 7 or ace 8. I think he plays a king very rarely this way, or queen jack, or a hand like 10-9 or king 9. I think we have more than 80% full equity. Only a few times a year I see it that they show me 2 pair in this spot. We don't give us the best price, cause he has 618 chips behind, but we have so much full equity. The pot is 580, so we need around 55% full equity according to chip EV. So according to dollar EV, we need around 64% full equity. But I think that he's bet folding in 80% of the time, maybe even 90 or 95%. That's very obvious that he wants to bet fold here. Next hand, the small blind completes, and I think raising and checking are both fine. The flop is okay, a raise makes no sense. When we raise and he chips, we have to fold. We can win the hand on the turn or river also when he checks. The turn is a really good card. We get many ace high and king high hands to fold, and hands like pocket threes, pocket fours, pocket fives, and we have massive equity when we get called. On the river everything busts. When we ask ourselves, are many draws busted? Then the answer is yes. Is this a good spot to bluff? No. Too many draws bust and we can't discount many value hands. He can play king queen or ace king the same way, cause he is scared on the turn, or a hand like queen jack. Sure, we can discount many straights and sets, but we can't discount enough hands. That's why I would just give up here. And he has played a queen this way. You shouldn't think, oh, my draw busted, I should bluff here, or I just have jack high, I have to bluff. There are some spots in which it makes more sense to just give up. And here we have another interesting spot. A fish completed, and we're the chip leader, and he's a second chip leader. We have the option to raise or to check. A shove is at best marginal plus EV. We don't want to do this with this weak player on the bubble. In hindsight, I like raising a bit more than checking, cause sometimes he will fold and he will check fold so many flops. But I checked cause I thought that I can outplay him post flop. He checks the flop and we should always bet here. And this is a spot in which many regulars play too passive. They check cause it's only bottom pair, but he has 6 outs against us. It's a very good result when we can take down the pot right now. He check calls, and I think his range is very 9x heavy. Sometimes he can have a draw like queen 10, 10 8 or a weak jack when he is afraid of getting raised. But overall his range is very weak. The turn is an ace. With these stack sizes, I think he's shoving most aces pre-flop. That's where we can discount an ace. And his 9 or jack is now a second or a third pair. We should bet again, and we should be prepared to 3-barrel this hand. We bet the turn again, and the river is interesting. Many players think that this is a bad card to bluff, but there are only two pairs possible, 10-9 and jack-10. Many open-ender have third pair now, like queen 10 or 10-8, and that's more combinations than the 2 pairs. So he has even more hands that he can fold now, and he has all his 9x hands and maybe a hand like king deuce suited, which is calling just one more time on the turn. And that's why we should shove the river, and we have so much full equity. He gets a slightly better price cause we bet 5-7 pot, but we have a lot of full equity. In this spot we need under 50% vote equity, and when we look at his range, he's never strong. He has so many 9x and jack x combos, or even a deuce or queen 10 or 10-8, when the only value hands are 10-9 and jack 10. then it should be clear that this is a profitable bluff spot. We cover him and we are on the bubble. We can put a lot of ICM pressure on him. Every factor is given to bluff a fish. Let's move on to the next hand. We flat pocket nines against a regular. We can peel once against him, and I think he will bet his whole range on the spot. We should check back the turn with our entire range, because we have many nines and tens, and when we start betting a king on the turn, our check back range is really weak. That's why I would check back my entire range, even a hand like ace queen and spades or ace jack and spades when I floated with a hand like this. The river is an ace and he bets very small. He can do it with an ace cause he perceives us on nines or tens, or a hand like 9-8 suited or ace queen, but I think that's very often a block bet with queens or ace queen. When I have no read that he uses this sizing as an induce, I think we have a lot of fold equity cause no draw busts. It's hard for him to find air hands in my range. We just get to the river with mate hands. I think we get a lot of better hands to fold, and I think his betting range is very weak when he bets so small. Maybe a call is slightly plus EV when he bets 8 with this sizing, but against which hand is he betting? Okay, sometimes they bet very weird hands on the river. When you get called on the river, you also have some future EV when they see your hand, cause when we ship a king, it is very hard for him to call, so it is not the worst idea to have a bluffing range on this board. The spot is really nice, cause it feels like we get fold here all the time. That's why it is not a bad idea to turn 9s or an 8 or pocket 7s into a bluff, especially when he invites us with his really small sizing. When he shows a king, we can note that he bet trips or a full house with 1/5 pot and can play him better in the future on those board textures. I think we talked in detail when you shouldn't bluff or when we should give up. We shouldn't bluff on a bad board runout, so when we have on 7-8-4 a backdoor flush draw and a gut shot, we shouldn't barrel the turn, cause the board did not change. And we shouldn't bluff when the card hit villain's range. When we have a flush draw on a 3-3-4 board, we check and the button checks, and the turn is an ace. We shouldn't bet, cause many check back hands are ace-x hands. You should always look which cards helps which range, your range or villain's range, and you should think if your bluff is profitable even with a draw. Don't always bet and think that you have full equity, cause you need full equity when you bet your draw. You should remember this. Try to internalize the principles of playing postflop correctly on the basis of your played hands. When you have not played a ton of hands and you are unsure, go back to the first part and just look at your c-bets. Look if you played them correctly, and after that you look at your check behinds and so on. Mark misplay hands or situations when you were lost or when there was an interesting spot, or how you would play other hands in this situation. You will learn a lot from this. Also review one hands. It is also important to review these hands cause you will realize that you make a lot of mistakes. This helped me a lot. Could I bet bigger to win more chips? Be ambitious to win more. I recommend watching cash game videos. You will learn a lot cause the thoughts are more complex, and with the videos you will repeat your thoughts and internalize these spots. You will also learn new ideas and concepts, and you can inspire yourself. When you have an interesting spot, we will offer hand ratings for you soon. then we can present you a detailed hand rating. And that's it from my part. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned a lot. I wish you a lot of success and best luck at the tables, and this was Ben CB for Raise Your Edge.